From Silicon Valley, the heart of startup land, it's Getting to Alpha, the show about creating innovative, compelling experiences that people love. And now, here's your host, game designer, entrepreneur, and startup coach, Amy Jo Kim.
Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Today, we have Dan Cook, pioneering co-op game designer, co-founder of indie game studio Spry Fox, author of the legendary Lost Garden website, and a truly inspiring guy. Come along as Dan takes us on a whirlwind tour of indie gaming life, stage gate funnels, remote collaboration, and the magic of small groups for getting things done.
Often when people try collaboration, they try to put a whole bunch of people in there all at once. Suddenly, everyone's going through the standard forming, storming, norming, and performing. You form a group, the group has to fight it out with themselves and figure out what they're doing and why they're doing it and who's in charge. And then you finally get some social norms. At the end of all that, you get to actually get your job done. And when you have lots of people, the storming and the norming phases of that group formation take a very, very long time. In fact, they may never actually converge.
Dan has a deep understanding of social dynamics in online gaming. Our talks blow my mind on a regular basis. I'm thrilled to share his insights with you today. Thanks for joining us, Dan. Tell us a bit about your background.
I went to school to get a degree in physics because I thought I was going to become a computer chip engineer, some flavor of electrical engineer. But then I got sidetracked because I did art on the side. So I did lots and lots of pixel art. So I ended up for a summer job, instead of pumping gas one year, I ended up working for a company called Epic Mega Games, making pixel art for one of their games. That sort of turned eventually into a design role, and I started doing game design full time after that. Then I sort of bumped along in the industry as you do, and picked up more design skills, picked up UI skills. A lot of it was trial by fire. It's this game needs UI. Okay, let's go and burn through 7 UIs and learn why they all are horrible. And then from there, I went into developing software. So we made art tools for 3D cards, which were new and exciting at the time. And I learned about product design, and I learned about Scrum and Agile and all the ways that you could possibly schedule a project. And again, it was trial by fire. It's we need to do this. How we're doing it doesn't work. How can I educate myself, read as many books as I can, and try to put it into practice in a live team to see if any of these things are effective. Along the way, I started getting some pushback that I was a little bit too much on the artsy side. So at that point, I went off and got my MBA, and I started learning the language of business. And then that transferred over to a job at Microsoft. And then I started my own studio about 5 years ago, Spry Fox, which is where I'm at now. And we are turning out strange little innovative games.
Some of which turn into hits.
Yes. We've had a couple of hits so far. We've had one called Triple Town, and we've had another one called an MMO called Realm of the Mad God. So we're all over the place. Triple Town was a success on mobile devices. And then Realm of the Mad God was actually an online MMO that was a success. So we tend to release all over the place. We have experience with all sorts of different areas, consoles, online games, mobile. I've dabbled in consulting on the side for places like WordPress and such as well.
Interesting. So earlier, you and I were talking about the process that led to these hits and the process that also led to other games you released, which involved lots of prototyping and lots of funneling your ideas so that you might be starting and working on several prototypes and only ending up shipping one. Can you talk to us about that process and what you've learned about what works when you're trying to figure out where the right product is?
Yeah, so one of the early lessons I learned about the game industry is that failure is very, very likely. It's a highly, highly volatile product space. So you have your dream idea and you try it out, and there's probably only a 1 in 5 to 1 in 10 chance that even if you execute wonderfully, that it's actually going to work out. So one of the things that I got really excited about is, can we make that process of making these games in this highly volatile space, can we make that more efficient and less expensive and try more things, find success more quickly, all the things that, reduce your cost of development and increase your chance of success. Early on, I ran into this model called the stage gate model, which is a popular product development model. And the idea is, imagine a funnel, if you will. And at the top of this funnel is a whole bunch of tiny little experiments that you're doing. These are like projects that you're spending. We spend on our games, we probably spend 2 days to 5 weeks on for those sort of smaller projects. And then then that's sort of a stage. That's a sort of an early concept stage, prototyping stage. And the gate says, what are our criteria for killing these projects? Like, what's a good project that will pass through? And so we look at things like, hey, is this game prototype engaging for at least 15 minutes? And if it's not, then we've got issues. If we look at things like, does this game, is our rate of progress on improving the fun of this game fast enough? You can sort of think of it, I think of it as prototype momentum. If you add an idea and it works, that's a success. And if you add an idea and it doesn't work, that's a failure. And you're looking for projects that have a much higher rate of success than the other ones. Like, sometimes you run into a project that is just painful to work on. You're like, oh, if I add this idea, it doesn't work. If I add this other idea, it doesn't work. I add this other idea, it doesn't work. And to me, that's a low momentum project. I've tried for years to turn those type of things around, and it's almost impossible. At this point, I say, just never mind those projects. I'll just move on to a new idea and try that out. So you do these stages and these gates. So during the stage, you're developing a bunch of experiments, and during the gate, you're killing them. And then you move some of those on to the next stage, and you invest in them further. And then you kill a bunch of those, and you keep doing this until you have like one or two concepts at the very end of that funnel that are actually going to be released into the world.
PopCap does the same process.
They do. And PopCap's a fascinating example of where it can go wrong. At one point in their history, they had a huge issue where their gates became so rigorous that almost nothing escaped. Basically, everything that came out of them had to be, $100 million game, or it wasn't worth releasing. Their pipeline of new innovative projects actually dried up. And if you look at many of their successful projects, they're ones that escaped the standard process. Process was too rigid, and therefore it was only by going outside of the process that people were actually able to make hit games.
Wow. So that really speaks to that you need different processes at different stages of your company's growth.
You do. And there's certain demands on it. Like one of the flaws of the stage gate process is that essentially bureaucracy sets in, and you get people who are like, well, there was this one example back in 3 years ago where this didn't work, so let's put a little criteria in that deals with that. And in doing so, that law has suddenly killed something that was really going to be quite successful. So for super large companies that implement StageGate, one of the things that they've had to learn is to be a little loose about it. Keep those gates a little loose. Don't get too anal retentive about the process.
You've done a lot of early stage product work. What are some of the mistakes that you see people making that
There's
you
lots of them.
Watch out for, not to?
so many opportunities to fail. Not testing early enough, not showing it to people, not showing it to potential customers or users early enough, not listening to them when they express vague doubt about your idea. Sometimes it's really, really good to dig into that vague doubt and ask, is it 5 whys or 3 whys? Or I forget
the 5 whys.
Yeah, you basically ask, so you're expressing some discomfort about that. Why is that? And then you keep digging in a little further. And often you'll find some wonderful nuggets of insight. For example, one of the things that we're working on right now is we just got a grant for a financial literacy game. And we were like, oh, well, we could have this little like Sims-like life simulator and we could have people like, live out a life, and they could learn like the financial decisions they make throughout a life relatively quickly. And we kept getting this sort of vague, like, I don't know if that's a good idea. A lot of people have tried something similar, and it doesn't seem to really work all that well. And the nugget of it, which was a really wonderful nugget that we can act on, is if you're poor, you don't like playing a game where you start out poor. It's not an enticing fantasy or an engaging fantasy for you. And so we'll build that insight into the game. And if we hadn't like listened to that, which we haven't on some projects in the past, then the entire project could have been fundamentally flawed from the very start. So talk to customers, show your stuff early. The other one is this has actually been the hardest one for me, is killing things. Can you like kill things early? I talked about momentum on a project earlier. And one of the things that happens is you get emotionally invested in a project. And it's the only project you have, and you can't imagine your life without it. And so even when all these negative signs are building up, you really don't have anything else to compare it to, and you don't want to get rid of it. You'll find tons of excuses to not kill the project. So some of the things that have helped me deal with that is having more rigorous like understanding of like what a good project is and a bad project is. And then the other piece is leaning towards killing things earlier rather than not. And then the last bit would be having alternatives, like always having like 2 or 3 alternatives in my head at once, so that even if I kill something, I know that I can jump onto another experiment which is also promising. And that's helped me deal with the very expensive mistake of developing a bad experiment for too long.
Wow. That was gold. What you just said. And it started with start the whole thing with lots of small experiments that you are not emotionally invested.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is really think like a scientist about your ideas, not like a pitch person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I actually find pitches to be complete and absolute poison. Some of the worst projects that we've started working on and actually had to release have been pitch-based projects. So I would say it's the difference between a story and a thing that needs to function. A story is a dream. A pitch is a dream. And you can hand wave and you can say all this wonderful stuff and you can get people emotionally invested. And once you've emotionally invested people, they'll charge into battle. They'll sacrifice themselves in order to do something that's really, really, really stupid. But if you're working at it from the perspective of, hey, this thing has to function, this thing has to work. I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, and I'm building this thing that has to work for real humans in the real world. You don't have that lie being told you. You know, you're not bought into this lie. You're bought into like, does this thing work? What are the metrics? What are the results? And it's a very different perspective. So I actually try to eliminate pitch concepts and pitchness from my prototyping process.
You now run a company, Spry Fox. You've been running it for 5 years, and you're co-founder, lead game designer. You do a lot of remote collaboration.
Yes. Yeah.
You all work remotely. And I think for many of us, first of all, that's reality. And second of all, we're really interested in lessons learned, how to do that well, what didn't work, things that worked particularly well. And of course, some of them are specific to you and what you're doing, but I think a lot of them are useful tips for everyone. So what have you learned about remote collaboration?
So remote collaboration has been wonderful. It's allowed us to hire some of the best people in the world, no matter where they live, It allows us to work from our homes. It allows us to set mostly our own hours. For people with kids, it allows them to, juggle kids and work to a much greater degree than they would otherwise. And again, that opens up, people who are in situations where they can't have a normal 9-to-5 job. Suddenly, these very, very talented people are available to us to hire. So there's a lot of good things about remote collaboration. In order to make it work, what we've done is we have a way of communicating. Right now, we're using primarily Slack. We were using Skype earlier. What we do is the secret sauce to all of our online collaboration is we split up into small groups. So if there's a specific project-based group, we generally start with a game will start out with 2 people in it. There'll be a designer and a programmer, usually me and a programmer. And we sort of set the what are the rules for working within this group? And since there's only 2 people there, it's really easy to set up here's how we work together. It's really easy to get consensus. It's really easy to have these sort of intimate one-on-one conversations with each other. They're little chat conversations usually. Sort of get the team coherent and on track really quickly. That's a really important thing. Often when people try collaboration, they try to put a whole bunch of people in there all at once. And suddenly everyone's going through the standard, what's the list? Forming, storming, norming, and performing. You form a group, the group has to fight it out with themselves and figure out what they're doing and why they're doing it and who's in charge. And then you finally get some social norms. And then at the end of all that, you get to actually get your job done. And when you have lots of people, the storming and the norming phases of that group formation take a very, very long time. In fact, they may never actually converge. So by starting with a small group, we sort of seed that and get that locked down early. In Toyota, they used to have this thing where if someone sees a problem, they're able to stop the entire production line and say, hey, there's a problem here, and deal with it immediately and fix that. And it ends up increasing the overall quality of their production immensely because problems don't linger. When you're dealing with remote working, it's really easy for problems to linger and sort of fester, and bad mojo spreads throughout the group. The interactions are so limited in many ways that you just don't have a lot of communication bandwidth to do what is called social grooming. It's hey, how's it going? How's your day going? Tell me about your kids. Oh, is that a new haircut? That type of activity is very limited. If there are social problems or group problems with the group dynamics issues, they don't get solved because there's not enough bandwidth to deal with them. So what we've implemented is this stop the line moment where if the conversation starts going off track, if it starts to become non-productive, or people are arguing with each other or talking past each other, we just immediately jump on a Skype call. And usually within 10-15 minutes, the issue's resolved and everyone goes back and is able to interact productively again. So having that outlet, even though it's just a Skype call, it's not an in-person thing, has prevented days of madness that I've seen on other teams, or weeks of madness on other teams.
So do you feel that the Skype call is providing some social grooming?
It is. It provides social grooming. It lets you hear the context of someone's voice. It also just, for some reason, it seems to close off conversations that are getting out of hand. We've all been on email threads where people are kind of ping-ponging back and forth with one another and never actually getting anything accomplished. And so the idea is to just, shut that down, and not shut down the conversation, but come to a conclusion and say, okay, here's the issues. Here's what we agree on. Are we all good? What why were you so concerned about that? Let's surface that, talk through it, and move on. Yeah.
That's a great tip. What are some mistakes you've made that you now know not to make, or that you've seen other people make?
The large groups. I think large groups in online collaboration actually can be a huge problem, because you get a lot of people who aren't necessarily bought into the conversation, and it just becomes this, I don't know, it becomes a very noisy hangout space, or it becomes a sort of a dead room that no one pays attention to. So keeping your team small seems to be super successful for us, which limits the areas that you can use our methods on. What was the other one? Oh, the other one, which is actually a huge issue for established companies, is often there's a group of people who are co-located with one another. And they're in the same office, they're talking to each other all the time. And because they have such high bandwidth communication, they are advancing their social ties with one another and their language about the project and their understanding of the project at a much different rate than the people who they are collaborating with remotely. So you end up getting this sort of like this fissure between the co-located people and the remote people. And this is especially problematic when there's only a handful of remote people, because at that point, the handful of remote people are actually the minority, and people just start ignoring them. And it's so much easier to just talk in person through things that you actually, it becomes this whole additional extra laborious process to like summarize what was discussed and send it out to people. And then they're not actually part of the conversation. So they feel a little alienated, and you end up getting this rift between the two groups. So what we do is basically everyone runs on the same clock. Everyone is basically or the same rate of communication because everyone is remote. So we just don't get that disjunction between the two social groups.
Wow, that's incredibly valuable perspective. Thank you for sharing that. So you've mentioned social norms a few times, Dan, and I know that you've been reading some studies on the side about social norms having some pretty unexpected findings. Could you just share a quick summary of what you're learning there about social norms and how they shape behavior?
Yeah. So there's this wonderful and disturbing study, which was there's a message out there, which is people are really realizing that there's these implicit biases to a lot of what we do, so as a response to that, we've been people have been saying everybody's stereotypes, like everyone's stereotypes, be aware of it. Social message to people, like tell everyone that they stereotype so they can understand it and stop stereotyping less. For example, one of the cases was if you have two equal candidates that are up for a promotion, and one of them is a woman and one of them is a man, then the woman will actually be promoted less, and when she does get a promotion, she'll earn less than the man. So that's like a very clear stereotype that we don't want to happen. And so if you actually tell hiring managers, hey, look, everyone's stereotypes, be aware of that and maybe do it less, this really perverse thing happens. They actually end up punishing the women more. They actually give them less promotions and less lower raises than they would otherwise. So the question is, okay, so wait, we tried to do this nice thing by making people aware that everyone's stereotypes. Why is it that it had the exact opposite result that we were hoping for? And the answer is that a lot of what people do is based off what they think the expected behavior in society is. So people were not actually saying, oh, I'm going to take an ethical stand against this and consciously to try to not stereotype. What they were hearing was the default behavior in society that everyone else is doing is stereotyping. Therefore, that's how I should behave. Which was just mind-blowing to me. It's like, oh, wait. So that says that people are not operating on an ethical basis. They're operating on this much, much lower sort of like flock behavior, where they're watching what other people are doing, they're seeing what seems to be the expected standard behavior, and then they're unconsciously mimicking that. So norms, the social norms of the environment, end up being much more important than sort of our conscious stating of like what we say is what we're going to do, or what we say is ethically responsible. So that's been that sort of insight has been influencing a lot of my design when I'm thinking of behavioral change and how we sort of create these human processes that get work done.
Wow.
Sorry, I don't know. That's a big load of stuff.
It's kind of mind blowing. Are there other studies that came to that same conclusion?
Yes, yeah. There's a whole bunch of work on this. It goes back to the Stanford prison experiment, where they normalized people to be guards and prisoners. There's some flaws in that research, but people have been exploring it since then. We see it in the news with Abu Ghraib. With the fine, upstanding young American soldiers, like how is it possible that they're doing these horrible things to these prisoners in Iraq? So you see the power of like norms and socialization there. There was another one on what was it? It was on cooperation. Let me see what this one was. Oh yes, this ties into my interest in cooperation. They found that players who were playing a cooperative game, such as two people sitting on the couch cooperating with each other, all on the same screen. People who played a cooperative game versus a competitive game, the people who played the cooperative game would react in immediately afterwards. They would react like positively to other people. They would treat them less aggressively. They do these little cooperation competition tests using game theory, and they would be more generous. And so they say, wait. So playing these cooperative games ends up actually changing people's behavior outside of the game for at least some period of time. Why is that? And again, they came back to the idea of social norms. The context that these people knew each other was that, okay, the social norm is how we treat each other nicely because we're cooperating together and we're dependent on each other. So that's the sort of like norm for this group. And I will, of course, continue using that because now that it's been set up, I try not to change my norms too often.
That's a really powerful idea. So as a follow-up, we can do it afterwards through email. I'd love to get these links from you.
Oh, yeah.
And share them with the group, because I think for a lot of us in what we're designing, using the idea of making social norms visible and suggestive is a very powerful idea. Exactly how you do that, the devil's in the details, right?
Yes, very much so.
We're gonna just take a few more minutes to close up, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So Dan, a couple of more questions to close. One is, you mentioned your interest in cooperation. What is your superpower as a designer? I mean, you've clearly got a lot of different awesome skills. Where's your sweet spot?
Oh, if I knew that. No. One
What
of the things
projects light you up? What makes you excited to get up?
Yeah. So one of the things that I try to do is I'm constantly trying to like identify a skill that I lack in and then improve upon that. And this is like, these are year-long quests, if you will. Like, so one of my quests right now is to make pro-social cooperative games. And I've had some experience with that. I've had some success with that. But it's a deep, rich field. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily my superpower, but by sort of studying it obsessively and working at it over a period of years, the hope is that I'll become much more capable of making those type of games. So I've accumulated like the multiplayer games with social structures. That's sort of an area that I find fascinating and exciting to work on. For a while, I was focused on evergreen games that you could play for years and that wouldn't get boring. So sort of how do we build these rich, deep systems that people can engage with for a very, very long period of time? And I feel like I did that. And so that's part of my arsenal now, but it's not my main focus. Previous to that, I was really interested in product innovation and having products. So a lot of our games are they're innovative in that they're in a new genre, or they're trying something new, or they're experimental in some fashion. Most game designers, I would say most working game designers, tend to instead, what do they tend to do? They tend to take something that already works and then make a plus 10% variation on it. And I'm less interested in that. I'd rather go down to the roots of an idea and sort of reinvent the thing to fit the current environment, which is, again, much more that entrepreneurial product innovation perspective.
Well, you're probably one of the world experts in cooperative gaming. So it seems that you might have some skills to bear to bring to that. Are the games you're working on, do they have any co-op in them?
Yeah, so we've got an MMO, which is Steambirds, and that one has co-op in it. We have a couple of single-player games that are less cooperative, but I hope to make them one day. And then there's another design that I'm working on that I'm excited about, which is I don't know what you call these games. I've heard them called MMO RTSs. Have you seen games like Travian or some of the old web games back in the day? Sorry, what would be a good example? Clash of Clans is vaguely genetically related to this. So they're games where you play 5 minutes a day, and then you basically, that's all you can do. And they're multiplayer, and often they involve I build up my city, and then I go and I build units, and then I attack somebody, and the attack takes 24 hours to complete. And then they attack me back, and I get into an alliance, and we have politics, and so on and so forth. I grab all your resources, and I become bigger on a leaderboard type thing. Mm-hmm. Very leaderboard centric. But anyway, this genre is one of the most popular genres in the world. It is one of the largest drivers of revenue. It's bigger than adventure games. It's bigger than real-time strategy games. When you see one of those horrible advertisements for Kate Upton or whatever it is, or My Lord, or those things that they average, the little sleazy ads that you see in the corner of websites, those are for this style of game, because you can play them in web browser, you can play them in mobile, you can play them on your PC. It was originally a U.S. innovation, and then it moved to Germany, and then it moved to Asia. So it's kind of a funky history there. In terms of cooperative, I thought these games are really horrible in the psychology that you use. It's all about beating up on other people and competition. Can we make a purely cooperative version of that? So that's the sort of design task I've sort of set myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you cracked it?
I think so. We have to do some more prototyping, but I think I've cracked it.
Thank you so much, Dan, for coming and sharing your wisdom and your perspective. As always, it's very, very stimulating and mind expanding. And I can't wait to play your upcoming games.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Getting to Alpha with Amy Jo Kim, the shows that help you innovate faster and smarter. Be sure to check out our website, gettingtoalpha.com. That's getting2alpha.com for more great resources and podcast episodes.